everyone. We're just about to get started. I think we have a little bit of a lag here. We're just waiting for Vonda's camera to jump in. Oh, there she is. Hi there, Vonda. How are you?
I'm great, Alan. How you doing?
Great. We're excited to get things going. We apologize for the delay. We had some tech issues on the last speaker. Um, but without further ado, I just wanted to go ahead and share with everybody that Vonda is an amazing speaker. She is nationally recognized. She has been a forerunner with the DEI initiatives all around corporate America, as well as through educational systems. We're really looking forward to hearing what Vonda has to share today. With that, I'll let you go ahead and start, Vonda. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Alan. I am so happy to be here today with you all. I learned a new title for myself. I'm also a STEMinist, thanks to Dr. Carlotta. I've been an activist in STEM and STEAM for years, and a few months ago, I actually went back and did some calculations in terms of how long I've actually been in technology and how long I've been a technologist. And my first job that I ever had was actually in technology, and that was when I was in 10th grade. So that being said, you're never too young to get started. One of the other things that Dr. Carlotta said earlier was she was late to the STEM game. And, I used to think that about myself as well until I started thinking about all of the work and the things that I did that had to do with science, technology, and engineering and math. And over the years, being a change leader and working in change in various corporations, nonprofits, educational sectors, one of the things that I have learned about is how to really make a meaningful difference when it comes to DEI. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I am going to share my screen so I can guide you in this discussion. So, Alan, if you could just give me an okay when the screen is showing, then I can start talking through this. Because I know we had a little bit of a lag.
Yep, it's looking good.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about leading change to make a difference, especially when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM and STEAM. And as Alan said, my name is Vonda Page, and I'm a career long change manager. So, what is a change manager or a change leader? A change manager is a person who works with organizations, groups, and teams to help lead them through various transitions. So, for example, I'm going to ask a question that probably many of the parents and teachers out here would know the answer to. But have you ever used a fax machine before? Have you ever used a rotary phone or did you have one in your house? Do you know what a VHS is? Have you at work ever used an application called Lotus Notes? And if you're a gamer or you happen to play video games, have you ever heard of or played a game called Atari? Well, some of those things you may be familiar with. Some of them, the name might sound familiar, but you may have been, too young to be around when those things were in use. But as all technology evolves over time, so have those things. So a fax machine was a machine that made a lot of noise. And in my first job that I told you about, it was my job to train everybody in the office how to use a fax machine. Nobody knew what a fax machine was. What we were used to doing is writing letters and sending them. Or you would send a telegram, or you would have somebody deliver a letter. So when fax machines came along, a fax machine is a way to deliver a message or information electronically, and then the fax machine evolved into email. So just to give you an idea of what a change leader or a change manager does, is I help the people, teams, individuals, or groups navigate and transition from one technology to another. Maybe they upgrade from one version of a technology to another. Now, the second part to change management and leading change is really about people and helping people navigate that change. So, whether that change is technology in nature or whether that change has to do with the work a person does, a new change that's happening in their life. So, I'm going to ask another question. How many people have started a new school on the first day? How many people have ever had their first day on a brand new team? Soccer, basketball, dance? Okay. And I bet a lot of people on the phone remember, or on the call today, remember starting a new job. Okay, so if you think about those experiences, starting a new school, going to a new class, joining a new team, what would you say about those experiences? Were they good experiences? Were they bad experiences, or were they indifferent? A good experience might be you move to a new school, they have an orientation before your first day, you get to meet your teachers, they get you all set up with your schedule, your books, your Chromebook, and everything. And you even have a buddy or, someone that's going to show you around. That would help you have a better experience when you are moving from one thing to a new thing. Another thing, that something that would make that experience not so good would be if you go there on your first day, nobody shows you around, you don't have a map of the building, you don't really know where the classes are, no one is talking to you. That would make for a pretty horrible experience. So I want you to think about good and bad experiences from the standpoint of the way to lead change to make a difference. All right, so I want to talk about the three things that I really believe are key to making a difference when it comes to DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think those things are change, equity, and justice. And what I believe is that you really have to understand change, not how to change, because we all know how to change. If we, for example, said, we wanted to start a new fitness routine, we know exactly what to do, and we know that there are plenty of resources out there to go find out. But do we know the process, and are we able to lead and go through that process in a way that doesn't cause us a lot of stress, in addition to being able to make meaningful difference? The second piece is equity. And we hear that word, we hear the word equity, we hear the word equality. Sometimes those words go hand in hand, but the way to think about equity is fairness across the board. Do people have fair access to opportunities, to uh, the same policies, procedures, practices? Is it fair? And we do know that there are inequities and inequalities across the spectrum, and especially when it comes to looking at the amount of diverse people, specifically women, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and others within the STEM fields. The third piece is around justice. And when we, understand change and we use that change to really drive equity, then we're headed towards justice. And justice is really about, making sure that people have, and that the opportunity is there to be just, to be fair. But it's more than equity, because justice takes it to the another level. The next level would be doing active and progressive things to really ensure that justice is done across the board. So when you think about making a difference when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want you to think about it from the standpoint of driving a whole ecosystem, right? That starts with change, moves through equity, and then is focused on justice. So, with that being said, how many would agree, and probably most of us, that we definitely need to make some changes when it comes to equity in the STEM fields as well as in STEM education? Okay, and so that's one of the reasons that we're all here today. So, how do we do that? How do we really start to think about change in a different way? What does leading change to make a difference actually mean? Well, I believe and I've learned that there are three key targets to aim for when you're trying to think about learning change and how to lead change. And those are critical thinking or thinking critically, managing bias, and empathy. So, when you think about going from one state or one place to another, and it's something that is unfamiliar, you might feel uncomfortable. And so, something that I like to talk about, and I like to just put it out here for people, when you want to make a change, when you want to do something different, when you really want to make a transformation, it can really suck. And I mean, change sucks for so many reasons. And I want to talk about that a little bit today. Why does change suck? I bet we all have a different answer. We could think it, is potentially because human beings, we don't like to try new things. We could think of it as, it's really inconvenient. We could think of it as, I am familiar and used to doing what I'm doing. So I just don't really feel like it because it does suck. And maybe some of us think, it's just because I'm lazy and I don't like to change. Well, the answer would definitely surprise you. The reason that change sucks is because of bias. Now, I am sure that we've all been in conversations where you might have heard the term unconscious bias or cognitive bias or gender bias. Well, I want to make it much more simpler. And I want to talk about bias from a general standpoint and from its most basic standpoint. Bias is our brain's way of taking shortcuts. So, for example, the way bias works is that if you take, for example, an ordinary function that we do all of the time, something like just breathing, something like blinking your eyes. You don't say and make a conscious decision to blink every few minutes. You're not saying, okay, blink now, blink now, right? You're not thinking, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out as you're having a conversation. So your brain is doing a lot of work for you in the background. And so that's a way to think about bias. So our brain works from the standpoint of helping us make decisions, but also at the same time, keeping us focused on things that we might have to take immediate action on or danger. So if we think back to our ancestors, right, that were, hunters and gatherers, they had to be on their toes worrying about prey or predators, right? So they didn't have a lot of time to be worrying about small things because if that lion came on them or that hyena or, some other form of prey, they need to spring into action. And so our minds get used to particular activity and we don't really think about it. For example, if you take, for example, a school that you've gone to for 2 or 3 years, and let's say you take the bus and you stand at the same corner every day, you get off at the same stop, you walk in the same way, you go to your classroom. Now, the next year, even if you go to the same exact school, I bet some of you have walked in and walked to your old classroom. If you've ever had a job where you've moved offices, I bet you have gone the wrong way or pushed the wrong button on an elevator. So, those just are some examples of how bias helps our minds to be focused on important things. So, the reason change sucks and how bias comes into play there is because we are used to doing things a certain way. So, if the change is difficult, like going from a fax machine to using email, our brains see it much more challenging and it feels more difficult. Now, let's move bias into the realm of equity or the realm of equality. So, we all have bias, and bias, you shouldn't take it as a negative word. But what we can do is we can learn to manage our bias. The way we learn to manage our bias is understanding what does it look like, right? Or how does bias show up? So, who here has ever been the only person in a room that looked like themselves? So, for example, been in technology my entire career, a little more than 30 years. And so, because I started in technology very early, I was always the only Black person, a Black woman, or woman in the 4 years. I'd be in there with engineers and architects and business analysts and other people, but else would be men. And w- I think about, those situations and imagining, trying to help you see what bias would look like. Imagine being the only person on a team or the only person in a classroom that looks like you. What is that experience? Do you maybe feel, I don't know, a little left out? Maybe you might struggle with getting your voice heard. Now, it doesn't mean that people are purposely being biased towards you, but the way bias shows up is that people are biased towards the familiar. So, if someone has never worked or played on a team or gone to school with someone that looks different, they might make assumptions. And that is one of the ways that bias shows up. So, the issue with bias, when we think about it from a DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, is around equality. So, if you can imagine back to an example of the one woman in a room in a technical meeting, and everybody is talking about a project. It is often voice heard or to get your ideas adopted or really discussed. And it's a product of bias. So, bias on the negative side can disrupt equality, can make equality worse, and in mind. So, the second piece around how to really develop change and how to learn change is really around critical thinking. And one of the things that I thought was so great about the early morning, the first session we had, and the scientist was talking about science versus magic. So, critical thinking is where you want to analyze and evaluate information carefully. And critical thinking, I believe, is one of holds us back from really being able to make meaningful progress when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason is because we just don't practice critical thinking skills. We don't necessarily teach or practice when you hear information, put on that thinking cap. Is that information coming from a credible source? Is that information current? How can I fact check it to know if it's true? So, if you're doing a science experiment, you're testing and you're analyzing and you're looking at data. And you can do the same thing in other ways too. So, critical thinking is when you are not just letting someone tell anything, but you are using your smart to analyze and evaluate the information to then make a judgment. And we'll talk about that just briefly at the end. So, I want to now talk about empathy. So, in our three targets, when we're talking about making a difference, and I said that, in order to really drive change or understand change, to have critical thinking skills, you need to manage. And the third thing is that you need to develop and learn empathy. So, empathy, really about being put yourself in another person's shoes and actually feel what that experience might be like. So, we know that race is a hot topic in the United States of America, especially because of our history here in this country, with Africans being enslaved for 250 years. We have immigrants from all over the world that come to America. And so there's a lot of conversation about race. 65% of us who live here in the United States, we're having conversations about. And so, I mean, that's a good number. So, two out of every three of us, we're talking about race, and that's a good thing. 64% of us, the same number, are really talking about the treatment of each other, how we treat each other. And those things go together. Before we talk about empathy and the treatment of each other, I do want to talk a little bit about race. And I know that this is one of those topics that is, people get uncomfortable, but it's okay to be uncomfortable. One of the reasons that we have struggled in getting more diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM fields and in the tech space is because we don't like to necessarily have tough conversations. Is that when it comes to debating race, right, there's different conversations about what races are and the qualities of race, quantities, and who people are and the way people are identified as a race. And I want everybody race is social. They're from a black person to a from a person Nepalese person that is Colombian. The only we look different is because of where ancestors migrated to. So if they migrate more, their skin darker and hair curlier. If they migrate to places that were colder, then they're going to have lighter eyes, lighter, fairer skin, and lighter hair. So I would encourage everybody to do some Google about race, and it will really help you to also think about it from the lens of empathy. I have some people here to just think about, you might encounter people that look different for every day action. It's not a lot now because of, being quarantined and doing a lot of things socially distanced. But think about empathy. And sometimes think that little step, wow, how would I feel if this was happening to me? So we got critical thinking is where we're really making evaluations and analysis. We have managing our bias, where we're really, thinking about making intentional steps to think forward. And then we also want to talk about empathy and really being able to have empathy for others. So that probably sounds like a lot. And it sounds like, okay, you're going to have to do a whole lot of things differently and you're going to have to change a lot of things. Well, I'm here to tell you, doesn't suck. I have an upcoming TED Talk where I'm going to talk about it and a book. Because what I've learned over my career is that change doesn't have to suck. And I tried to make it really simple. And I say the way to understand change is by ACE, be an ACE, use air, and then you have the 7 C's. So, what is ACE and what does ACE stand for? Well, I say that the first part of making sure that change doesn't suck and around a leadership is really around being an authentic, curious, and empathetic leader. I think those are key, and that's how you become an ACE. Authentic, be yourself. Curious, ask questions, find out what you don't know, and empathy, which we already talked about. Then I say, get some air, use some air. So, change not to suck, you need to assess the impact and the readiness. And then finally, you can really express change, especially when you have the 7 C's. And really simple, the 7 C's are a coalition of people, a culture of change, have the conviction to want, have the capability to change, the competence and know how to change, as well as the character to change and the courage because it takes courage to do things differently, especially when everyone else might not be doing it. So, what does that actually look like? And how do you think about change in that way? Well, you heard me earlier say about leading change. Leading change is really ensuring that you are stepping out in front of it, that you're not letting the change drag you along. So you need to do 3 things: speak up early and often in an empathetic way of what you're doing and what the change is going to look like, support your learning, practice, and growth in those areas. And then, thirdly, sharing your knowledge. Sharing knowledge is key. We can't keep it to ourselves. We have to continue the conversation because it's going to help. So, you can make a difference when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion within DEI by leading change. I have a really good friend. Her name is Amy C. Waniger. And ever since we met, I use this quote all the time. And the quote is, leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Because if you're a student, maybe you're thinking, I'm not really a leader. She's only talking to the grown-ups. I am not. I am talking to you because every person can be a leader. And it's really up to you to be authentic, curious, and empathetic, to assess impact and readiness around change, and to also be convicted and courageous, to really drive those efforts needed to make a difference in DEI within STEM. So, you to lead change. I want you to support the change. I want you to share the change. And I want you to stick with the change to make a difference. So, with that, thank you for your attention. And Alan, I'm not sure if we have a few minutes for questions since we got a little started a little bit late, but feel free to reach out to me at hello@radicalchangellc.com or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Vonda. That was fantastic. I apologize. We're going to have to jump over to our final speaker, but this was amazing stuff. I will definitely forward on any questions to you and to everybody that's watching. Thank you for joining us. If you jump back into the sessions area, you'll be able to find Mr. C. He's speaking live now. So Vonda, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. This is fantastic stuff.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.